Hello and welcome back to my channel and to my Claude Chabrol retrospective. Now for the last part of this retrospective, I want to leap forward a few years from the Hélène cycle to look at the actress who replaced Stéphane Audran as Claude Chabrol's muse, and that actress is Isabelle Huppert. They made many films together in the latter part of Claude Chabrol's career, and I think she's his key actress. For two reasons. First of all, because I think Isabelle Huppert is the greatest film actress of her generation, bar none. And I'll try and explain in a moment why. But secondly, her technique as an actress dovetailed beautifully with Chabrol's technique as a director, so they worked really well together, and I think he produced some of her best performances, and she helped produce some of his best films. And I'm going to take a sample of 4 of them to look at. Now, why do I like Isabelle Huppert so much as an actress? Well, I don't know if you remember, but in the 1980s on television, Michael Caine did a masterclass in film acting. What they did was they plonked Michael Caine in a studio, and they took some drama students, and he gave them direction on how to act on film. I don't know if you've ever seen it. And it's very interesting because Michael Caine doesn't go through that sort of pretentious Stanislavski-esque stuff, like Sturm und Drang. Instead, he produces a very matter-of-fact, almost artisan, workman-like idea of how best to appear on film. So he'll look at, for example, when you're having a conversation on screen and you're doing reverse cuts between the two speakers, and he'll say something like, when you're talking to someone, you look at that eye, not that eye, but that eye, and you don't blink. And if you do that, the audience will watch you all the time. I can't do a Michael Caine impression. That's as good as it's going to get. But it's very interesting. So it gives you all the tricks of the trade, right? And you realise how an actor uses technique just to hold your interest. It's almost, there's a sort of precision of a surgeon in how it's done. We like to think of actors just, getting into character and just doing it. And the director and the cinematographer handle all the technical side of it. It's not true. A good film actor knows where the camera is, knows what lens is being used, know where to hit their mark, they know how to keep the audience engaged in a conversation. And Caine goes through all those elements. Whenever I see Isabelle Huppert act, I think of that masterclass with Michael Caine, because her acting has a laser precision. The way she uses her eyes and expression, she very seldom moves. Just the bat of an eyelid or the twitch of a mouth connotes so much. She's that kind of actress. And Chabrol likes making films about people who are wearing masks, people who may be murderers or have got something to hide, so they want to be impassive. And that's where Huppert comes in. Her acting is so good for his kind of filmmaking. And also it's good for her acting because that's what she's working with. She's not a demonstrative actress like Juliette Binoche. She's a closed-in, mask-like actress with a very impassive, interior power coming out of her. Now, the first film they made together was one of the very first films Isabelle Huppert ever made. She'd got noticed the year previously in a film called The Lace Maker. But then the following year, with Chabrol, she made Viet Noir. Now, Viet Noir sees Chabrol change his style of filmmaking to a certain extent. The playfulness, the experimentation of the 60s is now gone. And instead we get a rather straightforward period drama, right, in formal terms. Viet Noir was a real person. She was a young woman from a sort of lower middle class, working class background, who in the 1930s killed her parents. She poisoned her parents. And Chabrol investigates why. And we find this young woman who is bored of her, sort of proletariat life in this dreadful little apartment with a slightly creepy father. And she goes off on a life of prostitution, meeting men, trying to sort of have a wilder life. And in trying to find this, she ends up killing her parents. It was a cause célèbre in France. She was imprisoned, but eventually the authorities intervened in her behalf and cut her sentence, and she was released in 1945. And so Chabrol reinvents this story. And from the get-go, Isabelle Huppert is extraordinary. She's just a young woman. She controls the entire film. You can't take your eyes off her. Every beat, every dramatic nuance is there. You know, this isn't some young actress finding their way. This is a mature actress who knows exactly what she's doing. Viet Noir is not considered one of Chabrol's best films, but I actually really like it because I think what Chabrol gets so right, in cinematic terms it's quite a simplistic film, but what he gets so right is the drip, drip, drip monotony and sort of seediness of that sort of working class milieu. You know, the seediness of her father. There's a wonderful scene when the father gets up at night and he's watching his daughter. She has to sleep in the living room, and he's watching her, and he goes for a quick pee in the sink, hoping she's not noticing. There's this kind of almost creepy sense of squalor in what appears to be a normal family life. And I think that's brilliantly evoked, and the whole 1930s setting is beautifully evoked. So what we're seeing in Chabrol is he's moving away from that experimentalism and freshness of the Nouvelle Vague. Then he sort of found his own voice in the Helene cycle of mixing murder with sort of pantomime, you know, and a sort of grotesque, surrealist exaggeration. And now he's moving into a more realistic mode, this kind of working in period costume drama. Now, 10 years later, he does this again with Isabelle Huppert in a film called Une affaire de femme. This made a huge impact on me when I saw it in the 90s. I recently watched it again. It's not quite as good as I remember it, but it's a very interesting movie. Again, Chabrol takes a real-life story, a woman called Marie-Louise Girard. She was one of the last women to be executed in France during the occupation. She was an abortionist. She did backstreet abortions for friends and acquaintances and made some money out of it, while also she helped to rent out rooms in her flat to prostitutes. And the French authorities, the collaborationist Vichy regime, they kind of killed her to make an example of her. Really, she was just a working class woman trying to make good, but they made an example of her because of morality. So Chabrol once again goes back into the French past, finds this woman who was a victim of, not so much a victim of injustice, but who did something bad, and trying to explain her actions through the society around her. The film is a much more straightforward period costume drama, even than Viet Noir. It's very fast-paced. It's like it's edited with a blunt razor. You know, scenes just jump into each other. You know, it's almost as though Chabrol can't wait to tell the story and get it over with. It's a curious kind of film. Again, the period detail is excellent. Huppert's performance is extraordinary. The sense of life in the occupation, the sense of what it was like for French people living, ordinary French people living in that situation, is very, very well evoked. I don't think it's one of Chabrol's finest films, but it's worth watching for Huppert's performance alone, I think. We go forward now into the 90s. Now, it's fair to say, in the late 70s and 80s, Chabrol dipped under the radar a bit. As did many French directors, actually. It wasn't a terribly interesting period in his work. In the 90s, he kind of came back to life. And the key film is this one, La Cérémonie, which many people, including myself, judge to be one of Chabrol's finest films. Now, on the surface, quite a straightforward movie. It's an adaptation of a Ruth Rendell book, A Judgment in Stone. The story is about this kind of bourgeois family living this beautiful life in this beautiful house. Jacqueline Bisset plays the wife. And they want to hire a new housekeeper. The first scene of the film, the very first scene, is the interview with the potential new housekeeper, played by Sandrine Bonnaire. We know immediately there's something wrong with this housekeeper. She seems very brittle and very sort of introverted. And we later find out that she can't read. She lacks education. And this housekeeper befriends the local postal worker in the post office, played by Isabelle Huppert, who hates this bourgeois family and is a bit of a mad free spirit, a bit anarchic, a bit crazy, who also has a hidden past where she may have killed her own child. And these two hook up and eventually become enemies of this bourgeois family. It all ends in an extraordinary denouement. When I first saw this movie in '96, the ending where the two women club together and take these shotguns and murder the family really shocked me. It's a very powerful sequence, brilliantly directed by Chabrol. I love the moment where the son opens the doorway and the two women walk in with their guns and just blow them to pieces. It's extraordinarily powerful. Now, what Chabrol does is rather interesting. There's four very interesting female characterizations. Jacqueline Bisset plays the mother very well, and the beautiful Virginie Laudayenne is the daughter. But Sandrine Bonnaire and Isabelle Huppert own this film. And what's interesting is Chabrol kind of casts them against type. Right, Sandrine Bonnaire, you'll remember her from Maurice Pialat and Vagabond, is a very explosive, very powerfully emotional actress. And Isabelle Huppert is usually a very sort of, interior actress. But here, it's Bonnaire who plays the brittle, introverted character. And Huppert is the crazy, loco character. She's absolutely wonderful in this film. I just love her performance. And together they provide a real nervous, jangling energy to the movie. What I also love about this film, and I'll just mention this in passing, what's great about it is it's called La Cérémonie, the rite, R-I-T-E. The Ruth Rendell novel was called A Judgment in Stone. Chabrol changes it to La Cérémonie. And the idea is that this killing of this bourgeois family is a kind of rite to be performed. It's a cleansing, right? And the whole movie takes that as its structure. So the very first sequence of the film, right, is the interview with the housekeeper. So her coming into the family, that's the start of the rite. If Chabrol had started it anywhere else, it wouldn't have been so perfect, right? And the film moves towards the end, the killing of the family. And then what happens is a lovely little bit of plot dynamics. Isabelle Huppert goes off in her car and is involved in a car accident and is killed. Sandrine Bonnaire walks out of the house towards the carnage with all the police cars. And the police find this stereo. And the stereo, which Isabelle Huppert has just nicked from this bourgeois family, the family were using it to record a live TV production of Don Giovanni. And so this recording has captured the whole killing that these two women have committed on the family. And what happens is, after they've killed the family, Isabelle Huppert turns to Sandrine Bonnaire and says, "C'est bon, no? C'est bon fait. It's well done." And those words, which are going to incriminate Sandrine Bonnaire, are the very last things heard on the soundtrack. So you see that sort of strange sense of completeness. From Sandrine Bonnaire first meeting the family mother to C'est bon fait. It's good, no? Beautifully, a 360-degree integrity. The right. It reminds me a lot of The Wicker Man, right? Because The Wicker Man, if you've ever seen the original studio cut, it starts with Edward Woodward coming to the island, and that's the start of the whole ritual by which they're going to kill him. So the whole of The Wicker Man, the original studio cut, is actually one cérémonie. It's one rite. And so at the end, when he's killed in The Wicker Man and they all dance around, is the end of the ceremony. But that it begins with him being invited to the island and then starting him to taunt him and make him the perfect victim. So there's a similar kind of beautiful integrity in this film. Now, a few years later, Chabrol and Isabelle Huppert hooked up again, and they made a film which is not very well known, but is actually one of my favourite Chabrol films, and a film I go back to quite often. It's called Merci pour le chocolat. It's known in America as Nightcap. You can find it on this wonderful collection from Arrow, Twisting the Knife. Why do I like this film so much? It's based on a novel by Charlotte Armstrong, a writer I'm not very familiar with, an American writer, and it's a basic kind of murder mystery thriller. So again, a bourgeois family, a pianist husband, and his second wife, who was his first wife, then he divorced her, went off with someone else, now he's gone back to this wife. And a young woman comes to their door, very beautiful young woman, played by Anna Mouglali, and she wants to be taught piano by the husband because she believes that he's really her father. She finds out that there's been a mix-up with the babies when she was born, and she could be the daughter of this wealthy pianist. So she sort of inveigles herself into the family. Isabelle Huppert is the mother, and she feels threatened by the invasion of this young woman. Now, this is where Isabelle Huppert's acting comes into its own. Her performance in this movie, it's not one of the most famous performances she's ever given, but it is the key performance for understanding her as a performer. She is quite brilliant in this film, because in the whole movie, she has to put up a pretense of being happy and calm and okay with this young woman coming into the family, but all the time the cogs of her mind are turning and she's plotting. She's plotting her next act. And Isabelle Huppert shows nothing. It's going back to that Michael Caine masterclass. It's laser surgery acting. Every single nuance of her face, the way she moves her eyes, she moves her lips, her gestures, is giving you an indication of what's going on inside, even though you never hear it. It's an absolutely incredible performance. And eventually you realise the nature of her plot, and she is exposed. And there's a brilliant scene at the end between her and Jacques Dutronc, who plays the husband, where she just falls into tears and is utterly exposed. And then, in a wonderful ending, Dutronc starts playing the musical piece that goes throughout the whole film. You see his hand go down, and the camera moves down to Isabelle Huppert, and she curls up on the sofa with this blanket which is like a web around her. It's an absolutely wonderful closing title sequence. I love it. I love the simple precision and beauty of it, the grace of it. But the reason why I talk about this film is because it is an absolute textbook masterclass in how Isabelle Huppert controls her performance and the film around it. Also, if you get this selection, I strongly recommend it. It's also got on it Rien ne va plus, also with Isabelle Huppert, The Colour of Lies, which is a wonderful film, and The Flower of Evil, which is also excellent. But it's worth getting it because of the extras on Merci pour le chocolat. And one of the extras is an interview with Chabrol, where he talks about his technique. Now, at the start of the film, there's a series of just conversations. People at cafe tables talking, and really it's a kind of info dump. It's exposition, getting the plot across. And you think it's quite sort of basic. In fact, when Chabrol goes through the editing and the movement of the camera, you realise how much he's thought about every single beat of how the dialogue and the interaction between the actors and the camera and the editing is done. It looks sort of raw. It's not. It's thoroughly thought through so that each beat hits the audience as he wants it to, almost Hitchcockian, you know. It's so good. So this movie, if you can get it out on that DVD or Blu-ray, it's a brilliant textbook, both in film acting and in film directing and editing. It will teach you a great deal. That's why I'm very fond of this particular film. Okay, so that's the end of my Claude Chabrol retrospective. He made so many movies. I couldn't possibly go through them all. I've just tried to give you a flavour of his best work, and I will do a top 10 coming up very soon. Next time, my next retrospective, I'm moving on to Pier Paolo Pasolini. I'm going to be going through the Criterion 101 box set, and I'm really looking forward to that. Please join me.